Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to my lecture, Supervision in Practice on Student Independence and Academic Literacy. In this lecture, I will go over the following issues: an empirical perspective on supervision, starting points and theoretical perspectives on supervision, and independence in thesis writing and the supervisor's actions, building a relationship, emotional aspects of supervision, support tools for independence in the supervision conversation, the supervisor as an assessor, and I will end the lecture with some concluding advice and reflections. So the first issue to take up is an empirical perspective on supervision. What can we say here? Supervision of independent work is an extensive activity in higher education. Both in Sweden, Azerbaijan, in every part of the world. It's estimated that over 100,000 independent works are written in Sweden each year. The estimate is taken from a report by Segerstam in their study from 2008, where the authors base their work on statistics from Statistics Agency of Sweden. And all of these 100,000 work are supervised in one form or another. Supervision is an activity that's important to look at more closely for several reasons. Examining supervision in more detail is about both pedagogy, time, and finances. How should supervision be conducted to enable as much learning as possible within existing time frames and within given financial frameworks? How do we ensure that all these people, all this time, and all this money are used in a rewarding way? Most importantly, in this context, supervision of independent work is a pedagogical activity that plays an important role in higher education, and whose design and implementation are of great importance for both students and university teachers. At the same time, thesis supervision can be said to differ from other university teaching activities. For example, through the demands on independence that are placed on students, and which to a large extent affect the conditions for supervision. This is a starting point for this lecture. Supervision in higher education has traditionally been associated with an individualistic learning culture, a dyadic pedagogical relationship between two people where one teaches and the other learns. It has been more about individuals in informal relationships and meetings. Supervisors and supervisees have learned, among other things, by doing and developing themselves through their own doing. In recent years, the starting point has been increasingly questioned as a greater focus has been placed on the collegial structures of the academic community and collegial learning, where process rather than product has been at the center. This can be described in terms of a professionalization that is taking place through several channels. Supervision courses, exchanges of experience between supervisors, handbooks on supervision, and research on supervision. Through these channels, networks, and forums for the exchange of experiences are created, which in a longer perspective changes the learning culture. They also contribute to making visible what is actually done in supervision through the formulation of models and through descriptions of the activities and factors that affect the activities. Here, the lecture should be seen as part of this professionalization, the purpose of which is to make supervision practice visible and in a longer perspective, contribute to changing the learning culture. So what is supervision? This lecture has an empirical perspective on supervision, which means that the focus will be on how supervision looks and works in practice. Based on a research project where we have examined supervision conversations and followed supervision processes, we will highlight and discuss different perspectives on how supervision looks and works in practice. From an empirical perspective on supervision, it will also be relevant how it's defined and which activities can be said to be included in it, since supervision can be understood in different ways. Supervision, what it should include, and what is the main purpose of it, can be understood in different ways. On a more general level, the purpose of supervision can be defined, for example, as teaching the student to learn or to contribute to a more general development of the student's ability to work scientifically. However, the purpose of supervision can also be understood in a more specific sense, such as that supervision should contribute to socializing the individual into a certain scientific discipline, or that the goal is the completion of the individual's degree project or independent work. The differences in how supervision is understood and defined can concern whether it's seen as a form of teaching or primarily as feedback or guidance, and whether it's perceived to include only a few learning activities or a significantly larger number. So this lecture focuses on the supervisor's perspective and the supervisor's activities, and therefore starts from an inclusive definition and general definition of supervision borrowed from Randy Brodersen theory. Randy Brodersen, in his study from 2009, which starts from the supervisor. Brodersen defines supervision as everything that a supervisor does through communication in oral and written form to help the student in the work of writing academic assignments within a specific time frame and to achieve an academic degree, to promote the student's learning and the practice of self-reflection, to socialize the student, into the subject community. So three great actions. Based on this definition, we have chosen to consider all the logic activities um, between supervisor and student as supervision. And based on the material we have used it's primarily about oral communication in the form of supervision conversations between students and supervisor. Uh, it's primarily about written communication from the supervisor in the form of comments in draft texts, which are either sent or which serve as a basis for supervision conversations. And it's also written communication in the form of email message sent between supervisor and a student or students. So when we talk about supervision, we are therefore referring to all these types of interaction between supervisor and student. A fundamental requisite for our discussions is that supervision is a social practice, social and collegial practice, both, which includes more actors than the individual supervisor and the student. Course managers, program managers, colleagues, examiners, and fellow students, as well as steering documents and guidelines at different levels. All these have different meanings for how the individual supervision practice will look and what the meeting between supervisor and student will be like. Given the scope of supervisor and supervision in higher education, one might think that there is a large amount of handbooks and research on the subject. But this is not the case. There is both research and handbooks, but in relation to how extensive the supervision activity is in higher education, there are relatively few handbooks, and the research is relatively limited. Also, there are a lot of handbooks that concern essay writing. There is relatively little written about the supervision of essays in these books. There is thus a large lack of concepts and tools for collegially discussing and sharing um, experiences and knowledge around supervision and supervision practice within academic activities. The research that exists on supervision is largely based on interviews, where a number of aspects of supervision are described by different actors: administrations, relevance, cultural and disciplinary differences, identity perspectives, conceptual starting points, etc. Several studies examine, for example, what qualities a good supervisor has or should have, such as being accessible, acting as a sounding board, showing commitment, and being a source of inspiration and support. So it's qualities of a good supervisor. Interview studies have also generated supervision models in which different types of supervisors and supervisory patterns have been identified and presented. However, you have investigated how supervisors demonstrate commitment and support for students. You have investigated how supervisor styles look and function in practice. There is often a big difference between the description of an activity or activity and its execution, which is why I want to focus on supervision practice in this lecture, that how supervision can look and function in practice. As a basis for this, we have a multi-year, multidisciplinary research project on thesis supervision uh, with a special focus on independence, where the main material consists of recorded supervision conversations and the focus group interviews with supervisors of independent work. And the project was conducted Java University, Gothenburg University of Sweden. So let's take now the issue of starting points and theoretical perspectives on supervision. Also, first spontaneous, so when it comes to supervision, maybe that primarily is a relationship between two or possibly three individuals, the supervisor and the student, or the supervisor and two students, if they are writing in pairs. So there are, as mentioned, considerably more people than that involved in the supervision process. In addition to the other students on the course during the thesis work, the student comes into contact with course leaders, seminar leaders, and examiners, all of whom may have opinions about thesis work or influence over that, how the thesis work should be carried out. The supervisor also has a relationship with the course leaders, seminar leaders, and examiners on the course, and sometimes also has one or more of these roles in addition to his or her role as supervisor. In addition, the supervisor, let's say, is part of various collectives consisting of, for example, other supervisors on the course or of colleagues who may not be supervising thesis thesis at the moment, but still have experience of it and may have views on how supervision can be or should be carried out. In multidisciplinary programs and education, these people may also come from different subjects, which further increases the complexity of the relationships and collaboration around this thesis supervision. In addition, there are a number of external conditions and prerequisites that influence and limit how supervision can be organized or may be organized by the individual supervisor. This is not only about governing documents such as educational plans and syllabi, but also about economic conditions that prevail within a program or course, which ultimately determine, for example, how much time a supervisor can spend on each individual thesis student. There are also different local perspectives. Uh, Local practices and power relations that are important for how the supervision process looks. For example, the courts direct them may have decided how the supervision of a particular course should look like, and they may have been established ways of working in the college or supervisor collective that everyone is expected to follow. A further complication may be that the different local practices and the expectations that exist are not obviously stated and visible to all supervisors, which in turn can lead to a lack of equality for the students. In other words, all the ideals and ideas that a supervisor cannot necessarily be implemented within the framework of the norms, guidelines, and expectations that govern and characterize a particular local academic context. That what is desirable or possible within a particular program or on a specific internship, the key to being able to say something more profound about the complexity of this supervision. It can be, for example, attitudes, actions, and relationships to both students and colleagues. So many factors we should take into account. We assume, as we have previously mentioned it, we assumed here that thesis supervision is not only an individual, but also a social and collegial practice. That's to say, the individual supervisor's practice constantly functions and develops in social interaction with others. That supervision should be seen as a social practice that develops and is shaped in collective interaction, has been discussed by, among others, by Olga Diste and Aquilina Samara in their study from 2006. They highlight how such an attitude to supervision can contribute to increasing the quality of supervision. They focus in their studies, the focus is not only on the individual supervisor and their relationship to the social practice and interaction with the student, but also on the social and collegial practice. Very interesting study, which I strongly recommend you can read it. As mentioned, essay writing involves a number of different actors and collectives for students as well, as they receive input on their essay ideas and text from many different sources. For example, from seminar leaders in the course and from fellow students in various types of group supervision discussions and seminar discussions. In addition, discussions outside of teaching, not least in various online groups and discussion forums, can be important for students' work on their essays. The fact that students can get ideas for comments on their essays in such contexts, both teaching-related comments and outside of teaching, is something that supervisors must also relate to in different ways in their supervision practice. Well, what could it mean for the individual supervisor if supervision were to be viewed more as a social practice and the collective and collegial concern? Potentially, such an approach could open up greater opportunities for college to share and learn from each other's experiences, or help clarify previously unspoken aspects of supervision. Yes. For example, it could encourage supervisors in a particular local academic context, such as a particular program, subject, or specific course, to start talking about and reflecting on things that may seem obvious or that constitute a kind of tacit knowledge that supervisors are expected to have. Yeah, without it always being clear how they are to cure it. So it's important to remember. Um, this increases the opportunity to make problems and obstacles in and around the supervision process more visible, as well as to develop greater consensus between supervisors who are in the same course or program. This in turn could help to make clearer what is expected of both the students, in particular essay course, and the supervisors. From that perspective, an increased focus on thesis supervision as not only an individual but also a social and collegial practice um, could be seen as an important part of the individual supervisor's learning process. Well, let's talk about this process as an academic literacy. In our understanding of the different relationships and contexts that supervisors and students are involved in during the thesis work, we start from the socio-culturally based theoretical field of academic literacies. Within this field, which focuses on the knowledge, competence, and abilities needed to be able to manage and meet the demands placed on speaking, writing, and reading with the academic sphere. A starting point is that academic literacy is not only about writing itself or about writing technical aspects that are relatively easy to acquire or teach. It's a broader perspective insofar as it includes all the activities that surround academic writing, which means that it's also related to social practices, institutional practices, power relations, um, hierarchies, and identities. One of the aspects, let's say, um, highlighted in academic literacy research is that expectations of students or researchers within a certain academic context are characterized by um, a different epistemological understanding, that different views of what is valid and relevant knowledge. This is in turn closely intertwined with the view of academic writing and how one uh, should write or expected to write in order for it to be accepted as relevant and valid in a certain context. The fact that the view of academic writing and what is considered good, relevant, and valid differs between different academic contexts is thus something fundamental from an academic literacy perspective. It differs not only from uh, uh, yeah in between different countries or different institutions of higher education, but also between different disciplines, programs, and courses within the same institution, and also at the individual level between different university teachers or researchers. For students, this has a consequence that they have to adapt to the different views of academic writing, and that the norms, demands, and expectations attached to it that they encounter during their education. Merrill and Bryan Street call this code switching. Yeah, the good terminology. This occurs, for example, when the course switching occurs when students change between different universities, disciplines or programs, but also in the transition between different courses within the same education. We would particularly like to uh, em- emphasize that code switching may be necessary when students move from the more basic parts of the education to more advanced ones, such as in the transition from the type of academic writing they engage in courses where the writing assignments mainly include classroom exams, take-home exams, memos, and submissions to the type of academic writing required to produce an independent work. They naturally benefit from the knowledge and experience of academic writing they have with them from previous courses and assignments. At the same time, they partly meet different demands when they reach this level of education. The competence and abilities they have developed up to that point are therefore not necessarily sufficient for the new demands placed on them. Yeah. Good point to remember for supervisor. The fact that different um, academic contexts are characterized by uh, different epistemological understandings linked to academic writing and literacy is important not only for students but also for supervisors, as they need to adapt their own working methods to the norms, demands, and expectations that dominate in different uh, environments. Differences in epistemological understandings between individuals, that's between individual supervisors or teachers on a course, can also contribute to supervisors choosing different strategies and approaches in their way of working. For example, a certain epistemological understanding may be the basis for supervisors preferring a Socratic supervisory style. Socratic supervisory style, this largely involves asking open questions to students to encourage their thinking. Uh, while a different epistemological understanding of academic writing may contribute to supervisors choosing a more directive supervisory style, which is more aimed at leading students onto a certain path or telling them what they should do next. In other words, both norms and expectations surrounding academic writing in a particular local context and the supervisor's own epistemological understanding can be said to have direct relevance to individual supervision practice. Yes, let's at this point take up the next issue. It's about supervision and relationship building. Another fundamental factor that's important for the individual supervision practice is the relationship between supervisor and student. And there is a lot of research that has focused on this. In a Swedish context, for example, Peter Kramer in 2016 has discussed different supervision models and how supervisors and supervisees perceive different aspects of the supervision process. Peter M. Shamer argues, among other things, that supervision is fundamentally a conflict-laden activity. Yeah. Why? Conflict-laden activity because a supervisor's task is to function as support or encouragement for the supervisee and get them to do something, while the supervisor himself or herself is not supposed to do the work or is responsible for it. Based on the fact that the supervisor and the supervisee have different levels of knowledge, starting points, and perhaps even goal. So according to Peter M. Shamer, there is a built-in asymmetry in the supervision relationship that can lead to misunderstandings and conflict. This symmetry. International research on supervision has also placed great emphasis on the individual supervisor and the relationship between supervisor and student. Here you see some of them. One aspect that distinguishes our projects in the University of Gothenburg from most of these studies that focus on the supervisor is that the supervisory role, the relationship between supervisor and student, is that our research is not only based on interviews, but also on recorded supervision conversation. This provides opportunity to include and discuss more aspects of the relationship between supervisor and student and what significance this may have in actual supervision. The theoretical framework for how we discuss the relationship between supervisor and student and its importance in supervision practice. This theoretical framework is based, among other things, on Olga Distis, this description of what are three main types of supervisor-student relationships, characterized by teaching, partnership, or apprenticeship. In her apprenticeship, in her definitions, a supervision relationship characterized by teaching is primarily based on the supervisor being an expert who explains to the student what and how to do, while the partnership model is characterized by a more equal relationship between student and supervisor, while they strive together towards a common goal, which in this case is to produce an essay. In the apprenticeship model, the supervisor functions more as a role model, which shows and gives examples of how the student can proceed. So the type of relationship between Um, the supervisor and student that dominates particular supervision process in turn affect the didactic tools the supervisor uses. And it affects all the demands and expectations placed on the student. This is three-part model. However, is a general typification uh, uh, of the supervisor-student relationship. In most cases, aspects from several of these models are included in a specific supervision process, not least because the relationship between supervisor and student can look different and usually should look different in different phases of the thesis work. In addition, the supervisor's role and actions can be influenced by the student's attitudes and actions, and vice versa, which in turn affect the relationship between them. So, what kind of tools the supervisor can use or should use? In several of the studies that have examined supervision at different levels, possible strategies and tools for the supervisor have been studied and analyzed. For example, these can include tools such as feedback, questions, advice, and prompts. Some who have investigated how such tools can be used in thesis supervision are Sophie Henriksson from Sweden, together with Mary Nelson and other researchers. They compared Swedish and Finnish content. Another research is by Sanna Vehviläinen in 2012. Sanna wrote about how Finnish supervisors use questions, as well as Anita Eriksson and Susan Gustafsson conducted an autoethnographic analysis of the use of demands, prompts, and questions. So you can read some of interest. In order to place these tools in a larger context and thereby gain broader perspective on the individual supervisor's practice, we base our analysis on the theoretical concept of scaffolding, which we translate here as support. The concept of scaffolding or support is borrowed from the construction sector, but has been used in educational research as a metaphor for the support a person needs to cope with a task that might otherwise have been difficult to cope with. In research on school and education, the concept of scaffolding or support has existed for a long time, and the understanding and use of the concept has varied, which is clear in the large amount of literature related to the concept. Let's see the literature, the researchers, all these studies, please. When you have time. Well, the fact that the concept of scaffolding is so widely used means that it sometimes tends to become watered down. So that everything that seems good in some way in teaching will be called support. To avoid this, we start from the more specific definition and understanding of the concept of scaffolding presented by Jannik von de Paul Teller. They emphasize that one of the main principles in the theoretical basic understanding of the concept of scaffolding is that it should include activity from both teacher and student, or in our case, supervisor and student. In other words, it's not about the teacher or supervisor on usually providing support to the student, but about a process of mutual give and take, where one jointly builds up the imaginary scaffolding that will provide support and help when someone takes on something new and unknown. Mhm. So in order to avoid this imaginary thinking, Van de Poel point out three main features that they believe recur in the different uses um, uh, of the concept of scaffolding. And these three main features, according to them, are fundamental premises for being able to claim that support actually or scaffolding actually takes place. The first main feature is that the teacher has knowledge of yeah, and builds on the pupils or students' prior knowledge, which they call contingency. Yeah, it's the first main feature. The second main feature is that the teacher gradually withdraws during the process, which they call fading. And the third main feature can be seen as a natural consequence of the teacher's gradual withdrawal, namely that the responsibility for the task gradually transferred to the student, which they call transfer of responsibility. And there, the Van Paul, de Paul and his colleagues in that study, in their review, they also make distinction between what they call scaffolding means, which are the tools the teacher uses to support the student in various ways. Distinction between the means and scaffolding intentions, which are what one wants to achieve with the support. Potential support tools, scaffolding tools in a supervision context can be, for example, providing feedback on the student's performance, giving hints that can help the student move forward, giving instructions that explain what the student should do next, giving examples of how the student could proceed and be a role model. That's a modeling for them. And asking questions that make the student think, reflect, explain, that's to say that require an active cognitive and linguistic response. The scaffolding goals that Van de Poel highlights that may be relevant in a supervision context include, among other things, getting the student interested in the task, helping the student to manage the demands that the task entails, managing the student's prior knowledge, contributing to frustration control, reducing freedom by taking over tasks that the student is not yet ready for, and keeping learning focused on the goal. We would like to argue that the student's independence can also be seen as such a support goal um, scaffolding goal in a supervision context based on the fact that it's a fundamental ability or competence that the supervisor, through his or her actions, tries to help the student achieve. The supervision context can, in many aspects, be considered an excellent arena for support work, as the relationship between supervisor and student is built up over a longer period of time than the relationship between teacher and student in other types of courses. This involves close interaction between a few individuals. There are therefore good conditions in the supervision situation for both the student and the supervisor to be able to be active in the support process, as well as for the supervision to be able to build on good knowledge of the student's existing knowledge and ability. And over time, the withdrawal on the part of the supervisor as more and more responsibility is taken over by the student. At the same time, it's far from obvious that all supervision interaction functions in a way that allows one to speak of scaffolding or support in such a more specific definition. So next time, in the next part of this lecture, the next video will be on independence in essay writing and the supervisor's actions. But now I present the references, the literature I have used and referred during my lecture. Baker, Brothers and Randy, Olga Distis studies, Peter M. Schermer. It's actually in Swedish. Pan, Mahmoud and Aden study, Gustafsson and Eriksson's study, Henriksson, Homkamp, Lienstrid, Lilis, Lundström, Magnusson and Zachariasson, Meinhardt, Matthews and Fraser, Van de Poel, we can name it several times during the lecture, Veiviläinen, the Finnish study, Whisker. So see you in the next video. Bye.